Welcome and thank you for joining us for this session, One Size Does Not Fit All, working with NG9-1 data across Arizona. I am Sandy Dyer from the DATAMARK team, and I will be the moderator for this session. Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording the session for viewing at a later time. All attendees have been muted for quality assurance purposes. We do encourage questions through the use of the Q&A section of this platform. We'll answer questions at the end of the session. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Yata Shihi. She's the Operations Manager and Senior GIS Analyst with Terra Systems Southwest. In her company role, Ms. Shihi designs, implements, and troubleshoots company-wide GIS data processing and quality assurance workflows, coordinates daily mapping operations, trains staff, automates procedures, and designs complex GIS analyses. Why don't we go ahead and get started, Ms. Shihi?
Hi everyone, good afternoon. And thank you, Sandy, for the introduction. And like she said, I'm Yata Shihi, and I work here at Terra Systems down in Tucson, Arizona. And I'm very happy to have this opportunity today to share some of our experiences working with the NG9-1-1 data. And I also hope you're all staying healthy and well in this crazy situation we're in right now. And I also really look forward to meeting some of you in person sometime. Maybe some of you will be at AGIC conference later this year. So the needs vary a lot across the different authorities in Arizona. And it's very important to recognize that there is this diversity of issues and potential solutions whenever we start a project. And the reason why some of these needs differ is because in each of these communities, there's different unique constraints. So for example, what kind of GIS expertise they have, and what is their staff availability in these different areas, or what kind of data resources do they have. So, and maybe business processes and organizational structures, can either help or not help depending how they're all set up. And sometimes we're really trying to meet multiple business needs using maybe just one data source. And this would require a higher level of collaboration in some cases. So all these things affect the different needs that a community has, and we really try to keep that in mind when we start a project with any of the different 911 communities. And even though the needs may be very different, the goals can be the same or very similar. So we want obviously better GIS data, and mainly because we are moving more and more into this GIS-based 911 routing, and we need to also back this up with sustainable workflows. And this kind of sustainability, it's really created in part by tested procedures and tools. And these can be data or spatial driven. But what matters is that in the end, the result is more standardized, more NG9-1-1 compatible data. And of course, other important factors are that we do create a culture of collaboration and in that share data with each other between the different stakeholders. And if these goals are met, it literally enables every community to continuously update and improve their own data and easily transition between their local schemas or those required by the NG9-1-1. And that way we can also maximize the available funding and resources if we try to approach it this way. I'll quickly go over some of the approaches that our team here at Terra Systems has taken to address these needs. So When we start a new project, we basically categorize the different phases of the project under these different 4 parts. First of them being the data evaluation, where we go and look at all the different data that they have available. And then making an improvement plan based on that evaluation. And then of course going to the implementing part where we actually go hands-on on the data and update and correct the data. And finally, we want to set in place workflows and procedures to really help in the future management of this NG data. So during this initial process, we try to take into account the expertise and time availability of each of these participating communities so that they can be as involved as they want to or need to be. And it's good to remember that the starting point for each of these projects can be very different. So we need to be flexible in both the approach and in setting the goals. And by making sure we identify these differences really in the beginning of the process, and that way can really then improve the outcome of the project. And a lot of these communities that we've been working with there needs to be a lot of work that needs to be done. And especially in some of the rural counties, because they often lack resources, and also they face very different kinds of challenges and obstacles compared to many of the urban communities. So the main question in this phase of the project is really, where are the errors at, or where can we improve the data? And to just touch a few of these, for example, missing data. One of the counties that we worked with, we did a geocode of address points to a street layer, to roads, and that revealed hundreds of address points that did not have a corresponding road segment. So it turns out that existing workflow was incomplete and really needed to be fixed before anything else. And then of course the roads were then added to the street network. Or we can have extraneous data. In another county, we found thousands of address points that were added to parcel centroids in paper subdivisions, or on large parcels of just vacant land. Basically, there were no roads, no parcel situs addresses, and really just no reason that these points should be in that NG database at this time. And in Arizona, we've been pretty lucky, and we've actually gotten many recommendations for data to be used, which is really key, because data availability is often something that can really hinder a project. But here we've really had considerable community involvement and input into which data to use and in what way. And that's really helped us framing these projects in Arizona. We also often find a lack of current or complete documentation for dataset updates. And these processes for updates are often literally in someone's head. And they do happen, but sometimes it's very sporadic, or they are, prone to just disappear if some of these individuals involved are maybe promoted or move on. But once the data evaluation is done, in this phase, when we're making the improvement plan, we want to set some priorities. So in every project we've participated in, the needs have outweighed the available budget often. And these two need to be brought into alignment. And for example, while it would be desirable for all the different address points to be placed either on a structure or an access point to property, it's more important to be sure that all non-vacant parcels do get an address point. So in these cases, we would then use the default placement of new points on these different identified parcels and put them on the parcel centroids. And also, if we have reliable assessor information, then we can use assessor situs to address some of these new points. For existing address points, though, we might, for example, compare the address with the assessor situs address. And we can only look at the ones where the assessor situs address and our NG address are different. So the idea of the whole improvement plan is really just to focus resources on what's most important and to come back later if there's time and budget to do additional data refinements. So after this improvement plan is in place, we can then really get our hands on the data. And as a part, like the first part really of the implementation needs to be to document. And it's really important to develop and document these procedures that anyone has in place first, and also what we are going to do. And we often do this in maybe some kind of spreadsheet format or create a detailed, repeatable checklist of steps for GIS analysts to follow. And then, of course, we encourage those analysts to then comment, and if anyone finds any problems, we can change that documentation and distribute any changes to anyone who needs them. And automation is becoming also like a bigger part of everything nowadays, and these detailed procedures are really the basis for that. And although we're not really a development shop, but we do develop and test various utility tools and scripts based on these procedures that we've created. So I'm going to go over some examples of data improvement techniques we've used, and also talk about some of the research that we've done to try to improve location accuracy in some of the following slides. So before I go into this, I just want to highlight that regardless of how the public often views addresses as very straightforward, like a given, addresses can actually not always be readily available. And they can also, in some more extreme cases, be assigned almost randomly by the people living on the property, and often without much of the knowledge of basic addressing guidelines. And so anytime when we're fixing data, we really try to use multiple sources, usually a minimum of 2 reliable sources to fix address information. And for example, in this case, we fixed an address attribute for an address point that just had unknown as its street name. And we utilized both the most current street network information as well as the county assessor parcel information to find and verify the correct street name. And when we're doing spatial error fixing, we rely heavily on current imagery, whether from public or private sources, and of course combined with other layers. And in this case, we would have to go through each of these points and figure out what needs to be added or moved or possibly deleted, what structures are essentially lived in. And sometimes there are many judgment calls you need to make on the way, but utilizing the most current reference layers, including parcel situs info, street network, or even Google, for example, they can all guide you in that decision making. And of course, any edits should always be tracked. Another thing we quite often do is we need to do legal research on various emergency service zone and jurisdictional boundaries. And it's been especially needed because a lot of the previous boundaries, they were often incorrectly mapped because they might have had a complex legal description, and or some cases they were not updated to include, say, recent annexations. And also sometimes when different stakeholders, they create different layers and data sets separate from each other, that can create overlaps and gaps between these layers when they're brought together. So cohesiveness is just very necessary in our efforts when we try to move this data into like an NG9-1-1 system. And kind of moving more into the research realm here, recently we've been researching using sub-address information to improve location accuracy of addresses. So, and including this sub-address information for 911 addressing, I think it could significantly improve the location accuracy, especially if you have multiple buildings in a large area that are based off the same address. I mean, of course, only if the local data actually includes the sub-address. But the way that the NINA standards are currently in place can cause some issues when you're building these address locators, and that's because the ESRI sub-address locator parameters cover information in fewer fields than the current NINA standard. So to work around this issue, we suggest that the state 911 authority should get together and come to some kind of conclusion on standard practice for how to use sub-addresses. And we've also been looking into improving geocoding match rates with aliases, an alias meaning alternative names that are assigned to a particular road. And in some cases, the alias name is totally different from the official street name. Like in this example here, the official name is Wild Game Trail, and the alias is Wildflower Drive. It's totally, completely different. So as part of one of our projects, we created an automated process that utilizes a dual range address locator that's designed to first look for addresses in the official street names feature class, but also uses the alias name table as an alternative name source. And this approach increased the geocoding match rate, especially in some of the rural areas, which often use more alias street names. And as we approach the end of a project and the data is updated, it needs to be maintained. And this has actually been surprisingly difficult and time-consuming, and really highlights the need for documented workflows. And what makes up for a good workflow really depends on your audience, and we've been trying to really focus on what a 911 administrator would really need. And we're also currently working with a subcommittee of the Arizona Geographic Information Council, or AGIC, to develop a workflow template that we could then distribute. And in that template, we want to identify the stakeholders. We want to identify their data sets and their roles in that update process or any of the different processes that they might have, and also the timing and existence or need maybe for different agreements or MOUs to really formalize formalize this process. I mean, until now, it's really just been based on verbal commitments. And what I want to leave you with today is that the NG data projects really, they're a pretty unique set of projects, and it gives us a great opportunity to enhance and document those different communication channels within the 911 authority and the local county departments. And because the needs are different, you have to really think about the priorities and the goals that you set for each project to best utilize these limited resources. Of course, in our case, hard work, persistence, and collaboration have really been the essential components to have the valuable outcomes for the given projects. And a lot of these processes that we are now documenting have actually never been written on paper before. And it takes a lot of work to piece all that together from all the different people involved. And once it's gathered in one place, it gives a great little opportunity there to streamline workflows or reinforce the structure, you know, in case maybe even an emergency like the one we're in right now. And also, I wanted to extend an invitation here if you are interested to obtaining a copy of any of our workflow surveys or templates. Feel free to reach out to me through email, and we'll be happy to provide them for you. And also, just as a last note here, things are obviously changing quickly in the world, and there are now many cloud-based resources or commercial off-the-shelf tools that are becoming more and more available even to some of the more rural counties. And that means that all of us need to keep up. So thank you. That's all I have. Anyone have any questions?
So Yata, we did not have any questions posed in the Q&A. Oh, wait. Oh, Lisa up in Flagstaff says thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, another comment is great job and great information. So unless we have any questions, I'll go ahead and leave it open for a little bit longer. I'd like to thank Yata for her presentation today, and for everyone who has attended. The conference wrap-up will be starting in just a few minutes, in actually about 5 minutes. I hope everyone's enjoyed the conference. I know that myself, along with the rest of the presenters, have enjoyed sharing their knowledge and expertise with you through these webinar series. And as mentioned at the beginning of this session, they are being recorded, so you'll be able to obtain those and watch them at a later time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Yata.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yata, do you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sure.